is
Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
and I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm an oceanographer, explorer, National Geographic, and founder of Mission Blue and an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders,
Yes,
for making this possible.
thank you. This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on a variety of topics. And I'm going to say happy first day of fall as well.
Yay.
So I'm going to start to share the screen while I remind everyone. Oh, look at that. Well, I remind everyone that they can put questions into the Q&A box as we go through. And we'll have also some links in there. And we want to remind everyone as we start that the world is
blue. The world is blue. Here it is.
Blue. So, the last time we got together, we were talking about the horseshoe crabs, and I wanted to remind people that there's still time to submit their concerns and comments to the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission.
Save the horseshoe crabs.
Yes, please. So check the chat for that link. And one thing that links horseshoe crabs and many other species together is what we're going to talk about today.
Seagrasses is not the kind that many populate their lawns with. These are in a different family, at least two families of plants. And they are true flowering plants that have seeds. You can't see them here. They're usually pretty inconspicuous, but they're really important and just now being acknowledged for their significant role in capturing carbon, big carbon capturing mechanisms, and oxygen generation. In fact, you can see, if you look very carefully, some little bubbles coming off of the seagrasses in this image. Sometimes it's very apparent, particularly on a calm day. If you hunker down in a seagrass meadow, you can see the little train of bubbles coming off of the blades. Photosynthesis. It's carbon dioxide plus water with chlorophyll yields food, sugar, and oxygen. And without photosynthesis, and for a lot of creatures, without seagrasses, life would not be possible.
Indeed.
So the big meadows in the ocean that contribute even more than seagrasses are those little photosynthetic organisms called phytoplankton, many variations on the theme. But because humans are terrestrial, we have been largely looking at, measuring, and accounting for oxygen generated and carbon captured by terrestrial forests and other, photosynthetic things. But in the ocean, there are just so many organisms. As long as there's light, you're likely to find phytoplankton, and in this case, in tropical areas, a whole host of organisms that capture carbon dioxide and form carbonates. This is Halimeda.
I was going to ask, it looks suspiciously like
Halimeda, yeah. And then there are also calcareous red algae that look pink. Sometimes whole mountainsides underwater are just coated with photosynthetic red algae that make the mountains, and in this case, these rhodoliths, photosynthetic rocks. It's actually like little living rocks. They form, again, take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and not only make sugar, food, but store carbon dioxide as a calcium carbonate, big carbons. And Kelp Forest, another really neglected ecosystem that we've talked about before, and we probably will again, that they're so important. And like seagrasses, they are in serious trouble. That about half of the kelp forests around the world have declined to zero in the last, since the middle of the 20th century, since the 1950s. And this is true with mangroves, seagrasses, marshes, And we should be really concerned about that because of their critical role in capturing carbon out of the atmosphere as it relates to climate. Blue carbon is the name being assigned to the marine organisms that do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of generating oxygen, capturing carbon dioxide, making Earth habitable for us. Now, this is on the Florida Gulf Coast. The tropical belt of the planet not only has coral reefs, most areas are blessed with these beautiful meadows of seagrasses. At least they have historically. Now they're in trouble, partly because we have displaced them. They live in coastal areas, and now, in this case, this is Florida offshore. The Florida Gulf Shelf extends more than 100 miles out into the ocean. In many areas, it's so shallow, like this is about 20 miles offshore, but still shallow enough so that sunlight penetrates and makes possible this vast seagrass meadow. And it's home to a lot of cool animals.
Yeah, it certainly is. And today we are extremely pleased to have Professor Katharyn Boyer from the Estuary and Ocean Science Center at San Francisco State University joining us. She heads up the Boyer Lab with a great tagline of untangling, unveiling, urging ecological restoration and estuarine resilience. So welcome.
Hello,
We
Kathy.
want you to join us and talk about seagrass.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I love to talk about seagrass.
and the related systems. But they're just such an iconic feature out here. I remember growing up with it in the Gulf and
in Florida.
And this is one of my favorite fish to encounter out in seagrass beds with these little baby barracuda.
But they act as if they're big barracuda.
Big barracuda.
They have attitude.
They have attitude even when they're tiny like this. They're just so cool they just kind of swivel around. And
they don't eat seagrass, but they eat the organisms that do eat seagrass. It's a nice food chain in action.
Yeah.
Passing the carbon along.
And other animals that are really reliant on the systems.
But they do eat seagrass, green turtles in particular. In fact, the seagrass that you've been seeing is mostly called turtle grass. Yeah.
How did you get interested in these ecosystems, Kathy?
Well, I think I first saw them in the Chesapeake Bay. Well, I'm sure I did. That's where I grew up, around that area. And they're very important there, just like they are in San Francisco Bay, where I am today. Really valuable habitat. Well, that's a lovely picture of a seahorse. Blue crabs, we like to eat. Dungeness crabs on the West Coast. Herring, all sorts of animals use them, and they're fascinating places.
It's a habitat just loaded with small, medium, and sometimes large creatures.
Yeah. They're just so vast. I mean, I think people don't really sometimes appreciate like how big these systems can be. There's some of the, you look at it like a rainforest or something like that, but some of these seagrass beds are actually sort of about that same size.
Hundreds of square miles in the Gulf of Mexico and places in the Indian Ocean. Similarly, these banks, and off in the Bahamas, there's a vast area on the shallow portions bordering the tongue of the ocean that, like this, just seems to go on forever. As long as there's sunlight and a substrate and clear water, you're likely to find seagrasses in the tropical areas around the world.
And okay, so you've been out in seagrass meadows recently.
Yeah, several times this summer.
And people have been, they've seen you kind of, lurching into the kitchen with these pans and trays.
This is a home laboratory.
Home laboratory, but the inquiring minds have been asking, what do you do with this, and what is it doing next to the blender? And
that's for cookies.
Yeah, this is for cookies, chocolates or cookies, but then you come in with this and put this on the kitchen counter. So this takes me back to my childhood when we used to have, like a pet whelk and other creatures in the kitchen like this. But people want to know about, preserving these plants, and how do you preserve them?
You float them out on a very special kind of herbarium paper. It's not just like paper you type on. This is a heavyweight, durable, long-lasting paper that I've looked at specimens that have been prepared this way, dried, put them in a big plant press. We'll talk about that maybe as a topic of another.
Yeah, I want to talk about that as
yeah.
an art form.
Yeah, well, it works. They are really quite beautiful, but they last literally for centuries this way. I've examined specimens that were prepared a couple of 100 years ago by individuals who put them in the Smithsonian Institution or other storage places where scientists can look back in time and look at the, like a timeline of a baseline of what kinds of plants, what kinds of seagrasses and algae and other kinds of creatures. It's really a record. It's evidence is what it really is. This is actually manatee grass. It has a round stem instead of the flat ones that are more common.
Very good. But you know, as we've said, we've seen like this tremendous decline, you know, between here's 2007 versus 2017 and the waters around Bermuda. And it's shocking to see that this kind of dramatic loss in really very geologically short pieces of time.
Yeah, and on my watch,
Everyone's watch.
and you know, it continues, and there is serious concern about the decline of seagrasses. Part of it is physical damage. Of course, when you tear up a shoreline and plant apartments or parking lots or whatever, or wall off the coastline instead of having these shorelines that are natural, and the changing chemistry. I mean, right now, the ocean is becoming more acidic because of excess carbon dioxide that we have generated. Some of it goes into the sky, but some of it also goes into the ocean and is changing the chemistry of the ocean, which is one of many factors that is causing seagrasses to just disappear. Oh, another reason.
Another reason. Because you always need more power. You have a boat. It's just,
well,
why?
The seagrasses tend to flourish in relatively shallow water. I think some species actually can go down. They're about 65 or 70 species, right, Kathy?
Yes.
In two families of plants, of flowering plants. They're not grasses, technically speaking, but they, because they are in relatively shallow water, I started to say they go down to, at least 30 meters, 120 feet or so, sometimes a little deeper. But they're right in that range where
they're easy to damage.
The power boats, the propeller damage, they also have a way of chopping up manatees and sometimes whales with the propellers. This is propeller damage. You can see.
Well, and trawling as well is a big issue, isn't it?
That's right. Shrimp trawls or bottom trawls for whatever you're trying to catch. Sometimes crabs are taken that way.
But it seems like
even oysters that are bottom dwellers. Yeah.
These guys, you know, it's really been tragic to see how, you know, they've really suffered from just outright starvation in many areas around Florida. And then just last month, the Chinese in China, the dugong relative, but with a different tail, was declared functionally extinct in Chinese waters strictly because of habitat loss. They haven't seen one since 2008 in those waters. And they used to just be, you know, these beautiful, iconic creatures.
Well, the good news in one way is that manatees in Florida have, with protection, you're not allowed to legally kill them, but they're killed with propellers that in shallow water, the people who are going too fast in areas where manatees live but overall, there are more today than there were when I was a kid.
That's good.
But globally, manatees and dugongs, like seagrasses, like coral reefs, like so many iconic systems and species are right at the border of either making it or not, depending on what we do or fail to do. The good news is when protection occurs, recovery is possible. I know Kathy's going to talk about a bit of that. Oh,
Yeah.
another grim story.
This is one that's really hit close to home, just in July. And every day I walk out around DOER and the waterfront there. And starting in July, this is the color of the water.
Looks like soup.
It looks like, I don't know, really bad flat root beer or something. But it's just really persisted. And we've seen it really up until maybe about a week ago. We got that little storm system that came through and kind of steered up the surface and kind of moved the water around a little bit more, that it finally started to break up. But this kind of brown tide situation happened.
So it is a photosynthetic organism. I think these are dinoflagellates. Is that right?
Kathy, do you know the exact algae that was?
I think it's a dinoflagellate. Oh, it's a microorganism. I think it's a
Protist.
protist.
Yeah.
But not a what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So
But
it's
but it really points to the fact that, a lot of the things that we do on the land are really affecting what happens not only to the seagrass beds, but to the ocean beyond, and it really affects, our health. We had people that weren't allowed to swim. Their dogs were ill.
why would you want to swim in it anyway?
Well, yeah, when it looks like that, it's terrible. But it really points to these other related systems with the eelgrasses, the kind of the colder water version of the turtle grass, if you will.
Well, this blocks the light.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of issue with it. It strips the oxygen, it blocks the light. We had fish just dead everywhere. No seabird activity, and it really was coming back. Kathy can talk to us a little bit more about it. But there are headlines all over saying that the root cause pee and poop coming into the bay is the very high level stuff. But there's just a lot of other nutrient loads that come into the San Francisco Bay where this was taken.
These so-called brown tides have swept the Northeast as well in recent times, New York Harbor, for example. So changing the ocean, changing our life support system.
And one more thing about this slide, as you can see, kind of up towards the top, there's that sort of black rectangular piece. And that's just a big storm drain that when we get heavy flow, and we seem to really want to try to increase the flow of untreated water during rain events and storm events so we don't have like localized flooding. The idea is to like chuck it out into the bay or the closest body of water as quickly as possible. And when that happens, it brings, all the
so-called nutrients,
all the trash, everything's just, shunted out into the bay without the benefit of it being kind of slowed down. But we're going to talk about Kathy's work now with the eelgrasses and all the area around here in the San Francisco Bay.
Sure. Yeah. So I love you to all come out and see us at the Estuary and Ocean Science Center. This is a picture of where we are and a map showing where we are on San Francisco Bay and Tiburon. So this is the only marine lab on San Francisco Bay, which is an odd thing when you think about there's 6 or 7 on Chesapeake Bay. Why is there only one on San Francisco Bay? But this is it. And I'm the executive director there now since June. But I've been a biology professor here and at San Francisco State for 19 years. So I've seen a lot of changes here as well.
I'll bet you have.
almost of geological magnitude.
And I have to say, I'm a big fan of the deep water access that you have there that was originally put in for submarines, yes?
Yeah, Navy ships, subs. You can see in this picture what remains of our wharf, which we would love to rebuild and be able to support vehicles that could come by and link us together to Alameda, where you are,
Yeah,
up the estuary, out to sea. We'd love to see that happen again.
so would I.
Yes. Oh, look at this.
Yeah, so we've been working on a lot of eelgrass restoration. This shows just north of the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge for our local viewers. And you can see all these brown patches. This is an aerial image from a drone, but it's quite visible on a low tide, all these patches of eelgrass that have come from the restoration work we've been doing. And I love this image of one of our students because we get our students very actively involved in these projects, and they love squishing around in the mud and planting these plants, and they love the hope that comes with doing restoration.
Yeah.
Which I know you
Yeah.
know a few things about.
Yeah.
And San Francisco Bay is a hope spot. And so you're certainly contributing to that.
She's our lead science liaison now for the Hope Spot,
Wonderful.
which is,
Yeah.
I'm so
Go,
grateful
Kathy,
for
go.
that. And she's going to actually come over to DOER like next week, and we're going to go around and check out that Seaplane Lagoon and see if there's something we can't do to help bring some eelgrass back there.
Terrific.
So let's go squishing some mud out there.
Good. So this is what it looks like. So eelgrass is one of those flat-bladed ones that Sylvia mentioned, of seagrass species. Zoster marina is its name, scientific name. And you can see one of the ways that we plant it for restoration in San Francisco Bay, attaching it to these bamboo stakes. And we shove those way down into the mud so that it holds the plant in place until the plant roots and then can hold itself in place.
Where does the healthy seagrass come from that you plant?
There's about 3,000 acres of eelgrass in San Francisco Bay, and the largest bed is about 1,500 acres all by itself.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are nice, healthy eelgrass beds in San Francisco Bay. They are threatened by various things, like you mentioned earlier, mooring scars, boating, high turbidity, and that can be from a harmful algal bloom, but it can also just be from the winds kicking up sediment and creating a lot of sediment particles being in the water column and blocking the light. So, and habitat, just habitat loss.
Yeah, we do see a lot of that where unless you have like a nice healthy stand of eelgrass, and all the critters that inhabit it, you get that sort of turbidity just kicks up just from the movement of the water and the wind.
But that's part of the value of the seagrass. It holds the sediment in place. Without the seagrass, it just stays in suspension. But that roots and that just holds everything down.
And critters.
Yeah, find the pipefish.
I love pipefish. They're the coolest thing. And they're relative to the seahorse. So these males give the birth as well. Yeah,
they carry the young, and boy, it's really obvious on them because they're so skinny when they're holding those young. Yeah. We don't have seahorses here, but we love our bay pipefish.
They're really cute. When I volunteered at the Steinhardt Aquarium for many years, I used to have to feed the pipefish, and I was constantly having to hatch out the little baby brine shrimp for them, and they just pick them off, and they were just amazing animals.
It's fun to watch them eat with their little tiny, their little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And find the sea hare. Where is he?
Yeah, but they get so big and chunky that they're hanging off the blades, and you have to think you're no longer cryptic and hiding by blending. You look like this giant blob that somebody's going to pick off. So there's a big one sitting on an eelgrass blade there.
Yeah.
So much for camouflage.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dungeness crab, herring, these are all really valuable fisheries. And so from a commercial fishery standpoint, we value the seagrasses that are used by these animals. But the little critters too, like the eelgrass isopod, really important food for higher organisms like the fish and the crabs and some of the birds.
Yeah, it was so sad, like during this brown tide episode, to see like so many smaller animals that were dead, like little crabs and little I don't know what they were, like little glass shrimp, things like that were just washed up. And it was then, but the birds will still eat, some birds that were still there out of desperation were still eating these things, and I really had to kind of worry about them, whether anything like bioaccumulates in them.
Here we go.
Yeah, so eelgrass grows at sort of the lower edge of a number of different shoreline habitats that we really value for shoreline protection and for providing places for all these critters to live and for slowing down water motion and reducing erosion. And so we think about them as being part of nature's toolbox. And all of these species can be part of that toolbox when we use them in restoration.
It's such an important piece of it because, if we even take it a little bit further back upland and, do things like the bioswales and the rain gardens and things like that, it can really kind of help slow that big pulse of untreated water, stormwater getting to the bay, and allow all these systems to really do the job of kind of pre-filtering before it gets to the bay or any body of water.
Yeah,
nice.
We've restored eelgrass for some time now, for all of its habitat values and the many things that it does for us and for nature. But we're thinking about it more and more as part of these complete systems of shoreline protection as well as habitat. So it's one of those tools.
It's great. There's all the buzz everywhere in urban planning about, complete streets, right? But this is really, a much more important thing that we should be focused on, or these complete systems.
It's working with nature.
Yeah. And especially those oysters. Got to keep those oysters in mind too.
What is it? The wild oyster project here in New York. It's the
Billion oysters. Yeah.
Here it's the wild oyster. It was the same idea though. Growing oysters, planting them, and then letting them be oysters, do their thing, filled with the water, and provide habitat for just so many creatures, capturing the carbon as carbonate. Really multi-beneficial.
But this is a really important slide here, Kathy.
Yeah, so these restoration projects that we do along our shores, we call them living shorelines because they're not just providing the habitat and creating these connections, but they're actually alive. They're so much more natural than the alternative, traditional engineered solution of a riprap or a bulkhead or a seawall. So when we can do those restoration projects that enhance the habitat while also protecting the shoreline, we call those living shorelines, or you might hear people say nature-based adaptation to sea level rise. And oysters and eelgrass and tidal marshes, they're all part of that.
Another important thing or feature of that, I think, is that it is so much more inviting to people to become engaged with the water. And if you're just out there and you encounter this sort of really unfriendly riprap or this bulkhead wall with a fence, these sorts of things we typically see, versus a living shoreline where you feel kind of welcome to come down and interact with the water and really grab up your hand lens or put on your mask and snorkel and get out there and really investigate it. It really seems that
I think the birds agree with you.
Yeah. Speaking of seawalls.
Yeah, so this is what we've done to protect our shorelines mostly, right? Throughout the world. We do it a lot in the US, and you can see how cut off the water is from the land in this case. The organisms can't move up and down. The carbon that gets accumulated along these edges, it has no place to go. It doesn't get stored. So it's a cutting off of those processes and those organisms And it can be really costly to maintain these too. They tend to get undermined.
Right.
So there are places where it makes a lot more sense to do the nature-based adaptation.
Yeah, you can imagine like in a storm situation, the energy that is contained in waves just coming and continue to sort of bashing against these walls. They don't really stand a chance, They're eventually going to get undermined and, as you say, just dug out and fail.
That's the value of mangroves and marshes, and of course the coral reefs and seagrasses. It all comes to kelp forests as well. They were great buffers for the shoreline. Now, it seemed like a good idea at the time that these hard walls and riprap were put in place, but now we know there's a better way, and it's great to see the research you're doing that demonstrates that.
Yeah, nature's defenses. You think about a big salt marsh or a stand of mangroves. I mean, they reduce that wave energy before it gets to the shore. And that's what we're trying to simulate with these projects.
Exactly. Yeah, look at this cool stuff.
So the oyster that we have in San Francisco Bay is very small. It's about the size of a silver dollar at the largest. But it's very valuable. It filters the water, it forms habitat. And in some of these shoreline projects, these living shoreline projects, we're creating reefs for oysters to grow. There's a lot of larvae out in the water that doesn't have a place to land.
Right.
So we give it a hard substrate, and there used to be so much more hard substrate in San Francisco Bay. It's either filled in or we've removed it for navigation or various reasons. And so if we want native oysters, this is what we do. We put out shell, or we put out concrete materials that the oysters will settle on, things like reef balls. You can see in these pictures, they look like big wiffle balls. Fish can go in and out of them. So they're good habitat. And we do that work together with putting the eelgrass in these days as part of these living shorelines projects.
Well, the filtration by oysters is phenomenal. If you want to clean up a bay, bring back the oysters and the clams and the other filter feeders. And these shelled organisms capture the carbon and hold it in place, as well as providing habitat. And for some, yum oysters. I wouldn't want to eat oysters from San Francisco Bay, considering what goes into the bay.
In there. Yeah, what is it?
Gonna mention that. Yeah, people always ask us when can we eat the oysters when we do these projects.
I know, right? They always do. But you think about right now, they're putting more than 57 million gallons a day of wastewater into San Francisco Bay. And if you think about that happening across, around shorelines everywhere,
right back to haunt us.
Comes back to haunt us, absolutely.
Yeah, and heavy metals too. We have a lot of mercury in San Francisco Bay, and filter feeders like this will take that material up. So you don't want to eat that or not eat very much of it.
Yeah.
Oh, that looks like fun.
It does.
Yeah. So this is one of our projects where we have oyster reefs and eelgrass both, and we have them alone and together, and we're trying to learn how important is it to restore them together versus separately. Do we get some sort of synergy by doing these restorations together? And we're definitely finding a greater variety of species when we have both together. And this is one of our undergrads out doing some measuring, and that's a nice flowering shoot. So Sylvia mentioned that the flowers are not very conspicuous on seagrasses, but and this is a perfect example of that, but she's actually holding in her hand a flowering shoot that has a whole bunch of these branches that will be covered in seeds.
I think there's some places where the seeds on seagrasses are abundant enough to be a source of food. Not currently, but in many places, but historically, like in Baja California.
Yes, that's right.
It's going to be the next superfood, isn't it?
Well, there's a Michelin-starred restaurant in Spain that features seagrass seeds.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Amazing.
So
what's happening here?
This is a Google Earth image of one of these oyster reefs we've put in. And it's showing you how the white caps on that water, which will occur when we get the wind whipping up our water, the waves as they hit these oyster reefs will be reduced in energy, and we'll have smaller waves on the other side. And we've measured about a 30% reduction in
Wow.
wave energy. And we've also found that if we plant the eelgrass then in that wave shadow, that we get better eelgrass growth. So this is one of those great examples of the potential for doing different kinds of restoration together and getting some synergy out of it.
That's great. Love it.
And if you look
Huh.
at these eelgrass beds, then, you know, they're the sink for carbon we've been talking about. They
Yeah.
also can change the pH of the water. So when we're interested in restoring oysters and we think about acidification of the water with there being more carbon in the
Right.
water, if
Yep.
the eelgrass can help to reduce that acidification by through photosynthesis, raising the pH just a little bit, it can help something like an oyster form its shell.
Right. Well,
Generating oxygen in the bargain.
exactly. So are there some studies that have shown sort of how much restoring a seagrass area can help with carbon capture?
Not so far, but we're doing one of those right now in San Francisco Bay. We have some instruments out that, well, you know all about instruments going into estuarine or ocean waters. But there's these things called sea foxes that have these very high-end pH sensors on them. And we're putting them inside and outside of restored eelgrass beds and natural eelgrass beds and looking to see if we can see that there is that effect in the restored eelgrass bed. It's certainly been measured in eelgrass, but we want to know, can the restoration help to support that function?
Right. 'Cause it would seem that it'd be a really valuable way to quickly make a difference in carbon.
Mhm.
If we can restore some of these systems, particularly to kind of bring them back to full effect.
Mhm.
But I think it, means we have to kind of change some of the habits we have
Well,
upland and the fishing methodologies as well.
yeah, dredging and trawling is devastating to seagrass systems.
Well, as I recall, they said historically that we had many of these big oyster beds and seagrass meadows going all through San Francisco Bay. But to Kathy's point, is a lot of it was kind of, dredge and fill and to make, more space that we could build on. And then, of course, during the gold rush era, having all that hydro mining and the big plumes of sediment and silt that came down and kind of smothered areas that were historically
Right.
very rich with the native oysters.
A fair part of the bay has been filled. I mean, it used to be water, now it's with that marker in downtown San Francisco where the shoreline used to be. And their tall buildings. Actually, some of them standing on top of where boats were docked.
Mhm.
And some of the excavations, new buildings, they find ships under existing buildings. That's where the shoreline once was. What's this?
So this is a brand new reef design that we've been doing to support native oysters and other organisms. It's modular. It's like a six-sided, like a tetrahedron shape, and it fits together. This is just showing you a set of 4 of them together. And it's textured. Actually, this was a prototype, so you don't see the texture on the outside of it, but the finished versions have texture that was put in the mold. If you see this really cool kind of I don't know, we've thought of it as origami at first, but it's not folded. It's almost more like an IKEA flat pack where you got your laser cut plywood and you assemble your mold. And part of the reason we wanted to do this is that some of the reefs that we've been working with are very heavy, 1,000 pounds, some of those reef balls.
Oh, yeah. You need heavy equipment to get them in place.
Exactly. And people need to get out of the way. And so what we wanted to do is for people to connect more to these projects, is to have something that gain strength from being modular and fitting together instead of being heavy. And so they can help fabricate, they can help install, they can help with the steps along the way. And you can see groups that we had out at the EOS Center working with us to do this work this summer before we put out these demonstration reefs.
Some assembly required.
For sure.
That's part of the fun. That's part of the fun.
So part of the reason we do this is because we're worried about these eroding shorelines. So this is just an aerial image of a marsh that's in San Francisco Bay and showing where that shoreline was in the 1850s and then in 1946, and then you can see where it is today.
Yeah. And of course, as we have, rising sea levels, it's gonna this area will be sort of inundated and moving inland.
Yeah. Yep. Storm surge especially. So we really need the marshes and the vegetated shorelines and then underwater as a natural defense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, nature's engineering really surpasses much of human ingenuity.
Yeah, and in this next image, you can see some of those things that we're
Oh,
interested
yeah.
in. Yeah, so these are 2 federally endangered species that use this marsh. This is the California Ridgeways rail. Ridgeways, I still have trouble saying it. Ridgeways rail. And this is the salt marsh harvest mouse, which looks much bigger in this picture than it is. But if you've ever seen
It's probably tiny.
you can see it's relative to the size of the pickleweed.
Yeah, pickleweed's not that big, but I can imagine these little guys just trying to make their way through that. It's kind of
Look at the erosion on that side of the left.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what the edge of that marsh looks like. And so we're losing that habitat that's so valuable to these organisms, not just the endangered ones, but the endangered ones are sometimes our poster children, right?
Yeah. Well, just like the manatee is sort of, and the sea turtle, is cause for people to take care of these systems in tropical areas, and
All the little guys benefit too.
yeah, the little ones benefit too. And so it's really nice to see that critter there. But putting out those oyster reefs, just thinking about the storm surges that can come through. I know Alaska just got hammered with like 10 to 12 foot storm surges, and just thinking about how fragile some of these shorelines are. It doesn't take much to really create some big channels and habitat loss that comes with those larger storms that we've been subjected to.
Oh my goodness.
All right, what's going on here, Kathy?
We also think about the human communities. So some of our poorest, our most underserved human communities are in low-lying areas that are already being flooded during high tides, especially the biggest tides that we have in the year we call king tides.
Right.
Combine that with winter storms, and these folks are getting flooded already, and so we think about these projects and making sure they're equitable, making sure that people in these communities are also having a say in the kinds of projects that get done along the edges of their communities, that they participate in it, that they get to experience the nature that is part of these projects. So the Ocean Science Trust has been doing this work to try to understand how to make these kinds of projects that we're doing equitable so that all communities benefit from them.
It's so important. It's, when we had the opportunity to, on one of our earlier episodes, to talk with Marie Fisher, the Wild Oyster, or the Billion Oyster Project, he was really all about getting kids of all backgrounds to come out and start working around and with the oysters and with the kind of shoreline and coastal restoration.
The No Child Left Dry project.
Yes, that's your pet project, No Child Left Dry. But it is so important to your point that, we often do see communities that are, the all the money for restoration or for flood control or something, it seems to go into more affluent areas, or you get whole communities that are now kind of being targeted for displacement through buyback programs and so forth, where they're just being told that, you know, you can't build here anymore. We're going to move you upland. We're going to move you somewhere else. But it's really kind of destroying the fabric of many of these communities, that really through no fault of their own, because we just didn't know at the time that some of these places were built, that these were going to be,
Or the way they were built.
or flood control projects that have happened elsewhere that are now changing the dynamic of some of those underserved neighborhoods. So it is really an important thing to address.
So, is that the last one?
Because that's our last slide. Well, no, we have this slide right here, because we're going to talk about the benefits that come with the coastal adaptation. And I was wondering if you could say a few words about the situation going on over at Point Molate in Richmond.
Sure. Yeah, so Point Molate has a amazing eelgrass bed, actually. And it's one of the places that I've seen more leopard sharks and more bat rays than any place else in San Francisco Bay. So we know it's really valuable for them to come in and get a snack and hang out, especially the juveniles, and hide from bigger predators. But yeah, there's been concern for quite some time now about development of that shoreline. It's an amazing place in that it's one of the few places around San Francisco Bay where there really is this potential for continuous, you know, water through the terrestrial, you know, the zone of switching from the estuary up into the terrestrial.
Right.
Has so much potential for restoration, and also for community access to these resources. So
Yeah. Just the water access seems amazing there. And you know, I've seen it so much around where DOER is in Alameda, where we've had sort of working access to the water just, you know, cut off, just evaporate, you know, place after place after place, and it's an island, you know. It's like, come on, you know, we need
Can't get to the water.
No, it's fenced off or locked up in one way or another, and it's really frustrating to that you can't easily swim in the bay and or get a boat in and out, or a family can't keep a boat anymore. So but it's also, you know, so many reasons for hope, because we do see places like Point Molate where the communities really come together and try to protect and preserve it from kind of unsustainable development schemes. So it's nice to see that.
Yeah, a real groundswell of support for maintaining that area in natural state, with parks, with water access for people, but being sure that hillside is not developed in a way that ends up leading to a whole bunch of sediment and nutrients and and all the things that come with development on that slope.
Yeah. Any place along the coast. And since 50% of the global population lives within 50 miles of the ocean, we got a lot of work to do.
Sure do.
So should we jump over to some questions?
Yes, please.
Let's see. Stephanie is asking, how quickly do the little creatures start living in the newly planted eelgrass?
Oh, right away. I mean, as soon as we go out and look, there are amphipods and isopods and snails and, well, the fish find it right away.
Yeah.
And if there's plenty to eat, then of course the fish will be there.
It's kind of an attractor for the whole food chain of things to go on.
Mhm.
That's excellent. And so how can people both locally and globally get involved with the seagrass restoration efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of these places are hard to work in, I will say that. So people who are surfers and swimmers in the bay might like to come and help do the planting. There are places that are firmer bottoms that are more widely available for a big cross section of the population to come out and assist with the projects. But in the muckier places where you're crawling and sliding and slithering,
Sounds
which is a
wonderful.
lot of places, it's fun. I will say it is very fun, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
But there are ways to get involved, because when we do the restoration, as Sylvia was saying, well, where do these plants come from? Well, we go out and we collect them in natural beds, and we spread that collection out. We take one here, walk 5 meters, take another one there, so that the impact is reduced to negligible, undetectable. And we know that because we've studied it.
Yeah.
Sure, we're not having an impact. But we bring those plants back, and when we bring them back to the EO Center, we have a flowing bay water system. And we have these tables where the water is flowing through them. We lay the plants out on those tables and we attach them to those bamboo stakes like I showed you. Or we have a couple of other methods. We have a little paper stick that we use. We tie the plants to another anchoring system. But that's where we put the plants into the transplant units. And that work can be done by anyone who can, be next to it and put their hands in and help. So there's lots of room for people to help with seagrass restoration in general in that way. And some places where people are largely collecting flowering shoots, there's a lot of work being done in the UK now with flowering shoots, where they collect those and then they get the seeds from those, and then they disperse those seeds. Lots of community involvement in those projects, so people get a really firsthand look at how the seagrasses grow and what lives in them, and they just feel a real connection to the restoration work.
That's awesome. And I think you were telling me right before we started that you had a recent seagrass symposium that you attended.
Yeah, so the International Seagrass Biology Workshop was held in Annapolis, Maryland, which is where I'm from, not Annapolis, but Maryland. So I was really glad to go back there, one of the first places that I had ever seen seagrasses. But people came from all around the world to compare notes about what we're seeing in seagrass, its conservation, its restoration, how it supports wildlife, how it stores carbon, a whole bunch of geeky scientists getting together, sharing information.
Better than that, right?
Is that an annual event?
It only occurs every 4 years.
Wow.
And it was supposed to occur in 2020, but for reasons we all understand, it did not. So this was the postponed 2020 conference.
I hope they catch it up a little bit. We need more seagrass involvement.
I believe
All right.
the next one is going to be in 2 years. So they're going to keep it a 4-year schedule. Yeah, that's going to be in Italy.
As a significance of seagrasses, both in terms of their importance, but also the fact that they're declining.
Yeah.
You need to speed up these meetings.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a question from Martin. What are the best multi-stage restoration methods to protect shorelines? What policy suggestions do you have to stop or reverse coastal residential building? In New Zealand, we seem to be building more and more luxury homes right on the sea and destroying natural habitats.
Well, it does take good policies that control development. We're very fortunate in San Francisco Bay that we have a very strong regulatory community and agencies that contribute to that. We have something called the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, who was formed to keep people from filling in the bay. And so we work very closely with them now when we're doing restoration projects, because interestingly, when you do restoration with oyster reefs, that's also filling in the bay, but for good reason. So, but it's good when there are policies and agencies that are looking to be sure even oyster reefs are permitted, and that you're doing this work carefully, and that we believe it's very much needed for the shoreline protection, but we also don't want to do work that is detrimental before we have studied it well. So, you know, these agencies are quite cautious, and they make us be more cautious about how we move forward with these projects.
And are you able to kind of work with other, you know, governments and so forth in other countries to sort of show the best practices or success cases here that you can kind of share those best practices and models with other nations and other government bodies?
Yeah, there is quite a bit of information sharing, and there was a great, it was a virtual conference, unfortunately, that was in Scotland in the fall, that was all about seagrass restoration. People shared their successes and setbacks and what we've learned. And there's a global seagrass nursery network now. That's
Oh,
a
cool.
really cool thing. It's a monthly meeting, and they said it, you were talking about time zones and how it's difficult for everyone to dial in live to dive to your dive in program.
Yeah.
But so they're having it at all different times of the day, so people can come in live, you know, it would be in the middle of the night for them at times, but also recording the webinars, so they're available to everyone.
Yeah, that's a big plus. So
Have people in the past, thinking about over millennia, used seagrasses for weaving or for other applications? What do we know about that? What do
Oh,
you know?
yes. They've been used for all sorts of things. You know, some of them are they have a lot of structure to them. So the one that primarily occurs in the Mediterranean, it's called Posidonia. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yes.
It forms these really thick thatch layers, and that thatch and the material itself has got quite a lot of carbon in it. So it's great at storing carbon, but that has been used for all sorts of things in the Mediterranean. You know, seagrasses can be used for, and have been used for, making baskets, and for stuffing mattresses, and for insulation in houses, and for food. So
yeah,
lots of uses.
Nice and salty.
yes. Yes, indeed. Well, we are coming up on the very top of the hour, and so we need to kind of get ready to close out here, but I wanted to mention that the you know, for our students that are out there that want to get involved in this, one of the great ways that we could be helping some of them to get going on diving is through the Women Diver Hall of Fame scholarships that are now open. And you're a member.
Yes, and now you are
Newly minted. I think we should nominate Kathy.
Good idea.
You're not already there.
Absolutely, let's do it. But the idea that you can bring the kids along with with
These
some
projects.
financial support and projects that can be helpful and be part of your, I don't know, maybe lead to you becoming engaged in some ocean project.
Yeah,
We
and there
should-
are a number of scholarships there that are for coastal restoration efforts.
Yeah.
And
We're-
just to learn, you know, just for people that want to, and it's open to, you know, both male and female students or any gender students, and so it's very broad, and so I encourage people to check that out. And
You don't have to be a girl.
no, or a boy. You can be whatever you want to be. You can just dive in and as you say, no child left dry, and
It's-
get out there and really get engaged in all these activities. And I just love that, you know, the idea of getting out there and being wet and muddy, and the bamboo stick with eelgrass, you know,
Making a difference.
making a difference. It's just amazing. So we're going to get up to more mischief with Kathy.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And before we close today, we want to say thank you to, of course, to Kathy and to the Ocean Elders and to the whole community of friends and followers out there that keep diving in with us. We are really grateful for your participation. Water connects us all. And we're
True
so
enough.
grateful. We're going to be back next time, and we'll be talking with Jenny Hoffmeister
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
And while everyone else is focused on Sharktober,
Yes.
we're going to be working on Octotober.
Squidtober.
Well, maybe it's Squidtember. But it's, yeah, we're going to be talking about cephalopods and octopi and all the communities. And have you ever seen an octopus in a eelgrass bed?
In an eelgrass bed? No, I'd love to.
I'll bet they are. I bet they're there. They're just like camouflage.
They've seen you.
They've seen you.
They have.
All right, so I'm gonna look for a picture of octopus in an eelgrass bed.
I'm sure it exists.
All right, well, until next time, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kathy. We'll see
You're welcome.
you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And remember, take care of the ocean.
As if,
Your life depends on it
because it does.
it does. See you next time, everyone.